The basket in the snow. Snow fell thick over Rose Hill, muffling the town into a hush so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. The last customers had gone hours ago. Only one shop still glowed on Cobbler's Lane, Tread of Grace, the little sewing room where needles clicked like soft rain and a young woman stitched hope into other people's torn lives. Ilara Wynne was 24 and already tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. Her hands were strong from years of pulling thread tight, but her eyes carried the careful caution of someone who had learned early that kindness could be punished. She was the seamstress everyone visited when they needed a hem fixed for a wedding, a coat patched for winter, or a uniform made to look presentable enough for church. They praised her work. They rarely praised her. That night, Ilara was finishing the mayor's wife's order, a velvet cloak with a collar stitched in silver. The fabric was expensive, and the woman who owned it was even sharper than the needles Ilara used. Lady Merelda Hartley had swept into the shop earlier like a storm dressed in perfume. She'd examined Ilara's stitches with a cold smile and said, "Try not to ruin it this time, girl. Some of us can't afford your little mistakes." Ilara had nodded the way she always did. Humility was safer. In Rose Hill, the poor didn't argue. They survived. She set the final stitch, tied the thread, and let out a slow breath. "Done," she whispered to herself, as if saying it too loudly might invite the universe to undo it. She blew out one lamp, then reached for the next, when a sound cut through the silence outside. A cry. Not the wind. Not a cat. Baby. Ilara froze, her fingertips still on the warm glass of the lamp. The cry came again, thin, desperate, and shockingly small against the heavy winter night. Her heart began to race, not with fear for herself but with something deeper, an instinctive alarm that said, something helpless is out there and the cold is winning. She hurried to the door and pulled it open. The air struck her like a blade. Snow whirled into the doorway sharp and fast, and for a moment she saw only white. Then her eyes adjusted. On the stone steps, half buried in fresh snow, sat a wicker basket lined with midnight blue silk. Silk so fine it seemed almost impossible in a place like Rose Hill. The basket was wrong here, like a jewel dropped in dirt. And inside it, 2 newborn babies. Twin girls so small they barely seemed real. Their cheeks were flushed, their lips trembling with cold cries, and their tiny fists clenched like they were fighting the storm with all the strength they had. Around each infant's neck hung a crescent-shaped pendant, silver and bright, resting against soft skin like moonlight made solid. Ilara's breath caught. Her mind tried to find logic. Who would do this? How could anyone leave babies in weather like this? She looked up and down the street. No footprints. No wagon tracks. No person. Only falling snow, erasing everything as it landed. Ilara stepped forward, her boots sinking into the drifts, and lifted the basket with shaking hands. The babies cried louder, and one of them, so impossibly small, reached out as if guided by instinct. Tiny fingers closed around Ilara's wrist. The grip was warm. And strong. Not painful, just shocking. Like the baby's little hand wasn't only holding skin, but anchoring itself to her, claiming her. Ilara's throat tightened. Tears rose before she could stop them. In that single touch, she felt something she'd never felt so clearly in her life. Being needed. She gathered the twins to her chest, wrapping them in her shawl, pressing her body heat around them like a shield. Her own heart hammered against their fragile ribs, and she whispered without thinking, voice breaking in the cold. "Shh, I've got you. I've got you." The wind answered with a howl, but Ilara didn't move away. She looked up at the dark sky, searching for a star, a sign, anything. The moon was hidden. The night felt watchful. And then she saw something tucked into the basket beneath the silk. A torn photograph. Only half of a man's face remained, pale skin, angular features, and eyes that made Ilara's stomach drop. Silver eyes. Not gray. Not blue. Silver like polished steel. Ancient and empty and unbearably alive even on paper. Ilara stared too long, feeling the cold crawl up her spine. She didn't understand why those eyes felt familiar, like she'd seen them in a dream she couldn't remember. She forced herself to breathe and stepped back into the shop. The warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. She kicked the door closed, and for a moment she just stood there holding the twins, watching their chests rise and fall. The babies were impossibly warm now, as if the cold outside had never touched them at all. Their cries softened into hiccuping breaths. Ilara carried them to the work table and laid them gently on folded fabric, lining wool and cotton together to make a cradle of warmth. She heated water, made a clean cloth, and with careful hands she checked their little faces, their fingers, their toes, counting and recounting like a prayer. They were real. They were alive. and someone had left them to die. Anger flared in her chest, sharp and unfamiliar. Elara wasn't the kind of woman who screamed in the street. She wasn't the kind who fought back. But looking at the twins, something inside her shifted, like a quiet seam in her soul had finally torn. She didn't know who their mother was. She didn't know who their father was. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No child deserved to be abandoned. She wrapped them tighter and whispered the words again, this time with a steadiness that surprised her. I've got you. The next morning Rose Hill woke to gossip. By noon, half the town had heard about the seamstress and the basket and the strange silk and the moon pendants. People came to the shop with fake concern and real curiosity, peering through the windows like Elara had become a new kind of entertainment. Elara did what she always did when Rose Hill got loud. She stayed calm, stayed polite, stayed small. But inside she was fighting. She went to the constable first because that was the proper thing. The constable, a thick-mustached man named Bram Coleridge, frowned at the basket as if it had personally offended him. You sure they're not yours? He asked, eyes narrowing. Elara's face went hot. No. I found them outside my shop. And you didn't see anyone? No. He scratched his chin. Convenient. Elara swallowed the insult. They would have died. I brought them in. Bram muttered something about women and their sentiment, and said he'd look into it, which meant he wouldn't. Rose Hill didn't look too hard into mysteries when the victims were poor and the answers might disturb the town's comfortable routines. When Elara left the station, the cold felt different. Not just weather cold, something colder. Like judgment. A voice called her name from across the street. Elara. She turned and saw Father Rowan, the town priest, hurrying toward her with his coat flapping behind him. He was older, with kind eyes that carried the weight of too many funerals and too few miracles. He'd been one of the only people in Rose Hill who spoke to Elara like she mattered. I heard, he said gently, lowering his voice as if the air itself could gossip. Are the babies safe? Elara nodded. For now. He looked at her carefully. You did the right thing. In winter, when snow melted everywhere else, the patch of ground where Arya and Lyra played stayed frozen, as if winter obeyed them. Animals watched the twins too closely. Cats froze mid-step. Dogs whined and refused to come near. Once, a ring of crows landed on the roof of Tread of Grace and stayed until sunset, silent as a warning. Elara told herself it was coincidence. She told herself she was tired. She told herself love could make you imagine monsters in the shadows. But one night after the twins turned 7, she woke from a dream with frost on her window pane, frost that hadn't been there when she fell asleep. In the dream, she walked through endless snow, following footprints that appeared ahead of her as if the path was being written just for her. A tall figure moved through the storm, cloaked, graceful, and impossibly still. Elara should have run. She couldn't. The figure stopped and turned. Pale face. Perfect bone structure, like a statue carved out of moonlight. And those eyes. Silver. They met Elara's gaze across the snow, ancient and sorrowful, like a king who had lost a kingdom and never stopped bleeding. His lips moved. No sound reached her ears. But the words landed in her mind like a cold brand. They are mine. Elara woke gasping, clutching her blanket like it could protect her. Her chest ached as if her heart had been squeezed in an invisible fist. She stumbled to the drawer where she kept the torn photograph and pulled it out by candlelight. The image looked faded. Not more torn. Just fading. As if time itself was slowly erasing the man's face. Elara's hand shook. No, she whispered, voice thin. Because if the photograph vanished, it meant the past wasn't staying buried. It meant the storm that delivered the twins wasn't finished. It was coming back. And this time it wouldn't come as a basket in the snow. It would come as a man. A father. A monster. A king. Elara pressed the photograph to her chest, then went downstairs to the shop before dawn, because the shop was her sanctuary, and thread and needle were the only magic she understood. Upstairs, Arya and Lyra slept curled together, their pendants catching faint moonlight through the window. Outside, Rose Hill lay quiet under snow. And somewhere beyond the mountains, a dark carriage rolled through the winter night, silent wheels over frozen earth, carrying a presence so powerful the air itself seemed to bow. The vampire king had begun his journey home. The man who didn't cast a reflection. The first sign that something had changed wasn't a scream, or a shadow at the window, or a wolf howling at midnight. It was the silence. Rose Hill had always been a town that breathed, chimneys coughing smoke, merchants calling out prices, church bells ringing, children laughing in the street. But one morning, Elara stepped outside Tread of Grace and felt the air holding itself too tightly, as if the whole valley had paused to listen. Even the snow seemed to fall more slowly. Arya and Lyra were already awake, bundled in wool coats Alara had stitched from scraps and thrifted fabric, their silver pendants tucked under their collars like secrets. Lyra hopped down the steps, eager to play, while Arya stood still a moment, her pale eyes fixed on the distant tree-line. "Mama," Arya whispered, voice quiet as thread sliding through cloth. "He's closer." Alara's stomach tightened. "Who's closer, sweetheart?" Arya blinked, confused by the question as if the answer was obvious. "The one in the singing snow." Alara forced a smile, the kind she used when customers were rude and she had to pretend it didn't sting. "That's just a dream." But her hands were shaking as she adjusted Arya's scarf. Lyra tugged Alara's sleeve. "Can we go to the market today? Please? I want to see the cinnamon bread lady." Alara hesitated. She'd avoided the market for weeks, too many stares, too many whispers. But the girls had been good and winter was long and she couldn't keep them hidden forever. "All right," Alara said softly. "But we stay together. No running off." Lyra cheered. Arya nodded as if she'd already accepted a rule written somewhere older than Alara's voice. They walked into town beneath a gray sky. The cobblestones glittered with thin ice. Alara held Lyra's hand and kept Arya close on her other side, the way she always did when she felt eyes on them. And eyes were on them. The moment they entered the market square, whispers began to ripple like wind through dry leaves. Those twins, those pale eyes, found in the snow. Alara kept her chin lifted. She had learned to walk through judgment the way she walked through cold, slowly, steadily, refusing to let it own her. They bought flour, thread, and a small bag of dried apples. The cinnamon bread lady winked at Lyra and slipped her an extra piece. "For my favorite brave girl," she said. Lyra grinned, crumbs already on her lips. Arya stared at the bread as if it held a memory. Then the mayor's wife appeared. Lady Merelda Hartley, wrapped in fur and arrogance, moved through the crowd like she owned not just Rose Hill, but every person in it. Two women trailed behind her, giggling at nothing, their cheeks flushed from warmth and privilege. Merelda's eyes found Alara immediately. "Well," she drawled loud enough for the square to hear, "look at that. The miracle seamstress and her little, snow prizes." Lyra stopped chewing. Arya's gaze lifted, calm and cold. Alara felt her pulse in her throat. "Good morning, Lady Hartley." Merelda leaned closer, eyes glinting. "Still playing mother, are we?" Alara's fingers tightened around her basket. "They are my daughters." A few people gasped, some shocked, some amused, some disapproving. Merelda's smile sharpened. "You can call stray kittens yours too, Alara? That doesn't mean they stop being strays." Lyra stepped forward, cheeks red. "We're not strays." Merelda looked down at the child like she was something stuck to her shoe. "Oh? Then where is your real family, little thing?" Lyra's lips trembled. Alara's heart cracked. Before Alara could speak, Arya spoke, quietly, clearly, like she was reading from a book no one else could see. "He's coming." The market went still. Merelda's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" Arya's pale eyes didn't blink. "Our father. The night man. The king." A cold shiver ran through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else made a sign of protection with their fingers. Merelda's face lost color for the briefest moment, just a flash, before she recovered with a brittle laugh. "Listen to her," she scoffed. "The poor girl teaches them fairy tales to justify stealing other people's children." Alara's chest burned. "I didn't steal anyone." Merelda cut her off with a raised hand. "Everyone knows you're desperate. A lonely little seamstress, pretending two strange babies will make you important." Alara's eyes stung. Not because she believed Merelda, but because Merelda had chosen the cruelest knife and twisted it. Then Merelda's gaze dropped to Lyra's collar, where the silver crescent pendant had slipped free. Her pupils narrowed. Recognition hit her like lightning. She reached out, fast, snatching the pendant between gloved fingers. Lyra yelped. "Hey!" Merelda stared at the crescent, her breath catching. Alara felt the world tilt. Because Merelda didn't look disgusted. She looked afraid. "What is that?" Alara demanded, stepping forward. Merelda's hand tightened around the pendant. "Where did you get this?" "It belongs to my daughter," Alara snapped. "Give it back." Merelda's lips parted as if she wanted to say something truthful, something dangerous. Then she forced herself into a sneer and tossed the pendant back, making it swing against Lyra's chest. "Cheap trinket," Merelda said too quickly. "Fitting for a poor child." But her eyes stayed on the crescent like it was a curse. Ilara pulled the girls close, her voice trembling with contained fury. "We're leaving." As they turned away, she heard Merelda hiss to her friends, "Quieter now. Keep an eye on them. If he returns, this town will bleed." Ilara pretended she didn't hear. But the words followed her all the way home like a shadow. That night, the twins wouldn't sleep. Lyra tossed under the blanket, restless. Arya sat upright, staring at the window, her small fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. Ilara lit a candle, trying to keep her voice calm. "What's wrong, my loves?" Lyra hugged her knees. "That lady hates us." Ilara brushed Lyra's hair back. "That lady hates everyone who reminds her she's not as important as she thinks." Lyra sniffed. "Why?" "Because some people confuse power with cruelty," Ilara said softly. "And when they don't know how to be kind, they choose to be loud instead." Arya's voice came like a whisper from the dark. "He's almost here." Ilara swallowed. "Arya? Who do you mean?" Arya turned her head slowly. Candlelight caught her eyes, and for a second the gray looked red at the edges. "The one who sang our names before we had names," Arya said. Ilara's skin prickled. "That's not possible." Arya's gaze dropped to her pendant. "It is." Lyra scooted closer to Ilara. "Mama, I had a dream. There was a big gate. And a castle. And someone called us Little Moons." Ilara forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dreams are just dreams." But her heart didn't believe her. Because Ilara had been dreaming too. Every night now, she walked through snow that never ended. Every night, she saw that pale face, those silver eyes, and the silent movement of lips. "They are mine." And lately, very lately, she'd begun to hear something else beneath the words. A second voice. A woman's voice, faint, desperate, almost like wind. Protect them, and protect her. Ilara would wake with tears on her cheeks, not knowing whose. 2 nights later the knock came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was gentle, almost polite. Which somehow made it worse. Ilara sat up instantly, heart pounding. The twins were asleep beside each other, curled like kittens. The candle had burned low. The knock came again. Ilara grabbed the fireplace poker. Because she was still human, still vulnerable, still a mother who would fight if she had to. She crept downstairs, every step loud in the silence. The shop was dark, the mannequins and hanging dresses turning into ghost shapes. The knock came a third time. Ilara's hand shook as she reached the door. She didn't open it immediately. "Who is it?" she called, voice tight. Pause. Then a voice answered, deep, smooth, and so calm it made her blood run cold. "Ilara Wynn," the voice said as if tasting her name. "I apologize for arriving at such an hour." Ilara's throat went dry. "How do you know my name?" Another pause. "Because you have been raising my daughters." The world seemed to stop. Ilara's grip tightened on the poker. "That's not funny." "It is not meant to be," the voice replied. Ilara's mind raced. A man. A sick man. Someone from town. But something in the air felt wrong, too heavy, too still. Ilara lifted the latch slowly and opened the door just enough to look out. A man stood on her doorstep. Tall. Too tall. Cloaked in black, the fabric falling like shadow around him. Snowflakes landed on his shoulders and melted instantly, as if he carried his own heat, or his own power. His hair was dark as midnight, pulled back neatly. His face was pale, not sickly pale, but moonlit marble pale, beautiful in a way that didn't feel human. And his eyes, silver. Exactly like the torn photograph. Ilara's breath caught in her throat like a sob. He looked past her into the shop as if he could see through walls. "May I come in? The cold is inconvenient." Ilara's hands trembled. "Who are you?" His gaze returned to her, steady and ancient. "My name," he said softly, "is King Valerius Nocturne." The air seemed to tighten around the words. Ilara's knees almost buckled. She had never heard a name like that in Rose Hill. It didn't belong here. It belonged to legends people whispered by firelight, the old stories of the Nocturne Court, a vampire dynasty hidden beyond the mountains, ruling the night like gods. Ilara's voice came out broken. "That's not real." Valerius tilted his head slightly. "And yet your daughters wear my crest." Ilara's heart pounded. "If you're their father, why were they left in the snow?" For the first time, something flickered in Valerius's expression. Pain, quickly controlled, like a wound stitched shut. "I did not leave them," he said quietly. "They were stolen." Ilara's blood ran cold. "Stolen by who?" Valerius's eyes darkened. "By those who believed they could use my children as leverage." Ilara swallowed hard. "And you couldn't find them?" Valerius's jaw tightened. I searched for years. His gaze softened just slightly when it landed on Alara again. Then I followed the thread that kept them alive. Alara didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it, like she was the thread, made her chest ache in a way she wasn't prepared for. A soft sound came from upstairs, Lyra turning in her sleep. Valerius's head lifted instantly, like a predator hearing prey. He didn't look hungry. He looked homesick. Alara's voice trembled. You're not coming near them. Valerius's eyes met hers, and for a second she felt something heavy press against her mind, an invisible force testing her. Then he stepped back slightly, hands open at his sides, showing he meant no immediate harm. I will not take them by force, he said. I did not come as an enemy. Alara's grip on the poker didn't loosen. Then why did you come? Valerius looked at her like the answer was obvious. Because my daughters are in danger, he said. Alara's throat tightened. Danger from who? Valerius's gaze shifted, toward the town, toward the sleeping valley. From the same people who stole them the first time, he said softly. And from those who will hurt them now, because they are different. Alara felt her chest burn with anger. They already hurt them. Valerius's eyes darkened. Then I arrived too late. Alara's voice cracked. You arrived 7 years too late. Silence stretched between them. Then quietly Valerius said something Alara didn't expect. You are right. He lowered his gaze, just a fraction, a gesture so small it shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because kings didn't apologize to seamstresses. And monsters didn't admit fault. Alara's hands shook, not with fear alone now but confusion. Valerius stepped forward one slow pace. I can prove who I am, he said. But I will not frighten them by appearing in their room uninvited. His gaze lifted, locking on hers. Tell me, Alara Wynne, do they call you mother? Alara's throat tightened. Yes. Valerius nodded once. Then you have done what I could not. Alara's heart twisted painfully. Valerius's voice lowered, almost gentle. Let me see them. Just for a moment. From a distance. Let me know they are real. Alara hesitated. Every protective instinct in her screamed no. But another part of her, the part that had stared into those silver eyes on paper for years, the part that had felt the invisible thread, whispered something else. This is the truth you've been waiting for. Alara swallowed hard. Stay here, she said, voice shaking. Don't move. Valerius inclined his head. As you wish. Alara climbed the stairs like she was walking into a storm. She opened the bedroom door quietly. The twins slept in one bed, curled toward each other. Their pendants lay against their skin, the silver crescents gleaming faintly in the candlelight. Alara stood in the doorway watching them, heart pounding. Behind her, she felt Valerius's presence like a cold flame. He didn't enter. He simply stood at the foot of the stairs and looked up, his gaze reaching into the room without touching anything. And then, Arya's eyes opened, straight to him, as if she'd been waiting. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled, small and soft and terrifyingly calm. You came, Arya whispered. Lyra stirred, blinking sleepily. Mama? Then she saw Valerius. Her eyes widened. Not with fear. With recognition. Like her soul remembered him even if her mind didn't. Night man, Lyra breathed. Valerius didn't move. His silver eyes shone with something Alara couldn't name, grief and awe and longing so deep it made the air feel heavy. My little moons, he whispered. And Alara realized something that made her knees go weak. The twins weren't afraid of him. They were drawn to him. Alara stepped between them and the doorway instinctively. Valerius's gaze snapped to her, sharp, protective, almost possessive, and then he controlled himself again. I will not take them, he said, voice rough now. But you must listen to me. Alara's heart hammered. Listen to what? Valerius's expression darkened like a storm rolling in. There are hunters in your town, he said quietly. Human ones. Paid ones. Alara's breath caught. By who? Valerius's lips tightened. By someone who wants my throne, he said. Alara's blood turned to ice. And what do they want with my daughters? Valerius's voice dropped, deadly calm. They want to use them, he said, to lure me into a trap. Alara stared at him, fear rising like a wave. You're saying? Yes, Valerius said, eyes burning silver. They are bait. Lyra clutched Alara's arm. Mama? Alara's chest tightened. She looked down at the twins, her babies, her heart, her whole world. Then she looked back at the vampire king standing in her shop like the night had learned to speak. And what are you going to do? Elara demanded, voice shaking. Because I swear, if your world brings danger to my girls. Valerius's gaze locked on hers, fierce and unblinking. I will burn the world before I let harm touch them again, he said. Then, softer in a way that felt like a confession. And I will not let harm touch you either. Elara's breath caught. Because no one had ever said that to her. Not truly. Not like it mattered. The shop was silent except for the wind outside. And Elara realized the story of her life had just changed shape, like fabric pulled too tight, forced into a new pattern. Because the Vampire King had returned. And now the hardest part wasn't the danger. It was the question that would tear her heart in two. Bloodlines and bargains. The night did not end with screams or violence. That somehow made it worse. Valerius Nocturne remained in Elara's shop until dawn, standing near the door like a shadow that refused to cross a threshold it hadn't been invited through. He did not sit. He did not pace. He simply waited, still as stone, eyes alert, senses stretched beyond human limits. Elara did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the twins' bed upstairs, one hand resting on Arya's shoulder, the other curled protectively around Lyra's fingers. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment when stories turned cruel, when powerful men took what they wanted and left nothing behind. But Valerius did not come upstairs. Instead, he spoke softly from below, his voice carrying without effort. I will leave before sunrise, he said. Hunters move by day. I will not draw them to you. Elara's jaw tightened. You already have. Silence followed, not offended, not defensive. Just heavy. Yes, Valerius admitted. And for that I am sorry. Elara flinched at the sincerity of it. Apologies from men like him were not supposed to exist. Arya stirred beside her. Mama, she whispered, eyes still closed. He tells the truth. Elara swallowed. How do you know? Arya opened her eyes and in the faint pre-dawn light, the red shimmered clearly now, not frightening but undeniable. Because lies hurt when they touch my head, Arya said simply. His words don't hurt. Lyra yawned. Can he stay? He smells like snow and fire. Elara let out a shaky breath. Of course he does. She stood slowly and guided the twins back under the blankets. Sleep. Both of you. They obeyed, curling together, trusting her the way children always do, blindly, completely. That trust nearly broke her. Elara descended the stairs quietly. Valerius turned the moment she reached the bottom, as if he'd sensed her movement before she made it. You should rest, he said. Elara laughed once, sharp and humorless. I found my children in the snow, raised them alone for 7 years, and now a vampire king is standing in my shop telling me they're being hunted. I don't think rest is an option. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Fair, he said. Elara folded her arms. You said they were stolen. Valerius nodded. From my stronghold. From my wife. The word hit Elara harder than she expected. Your wife. Yes. His voice lowered. Queen Seraphine. Elara waited for the jealousy to come. It didn't. What came instead was a quiet ache, because whatever Valerius was, whatever power he held, loss had carved deep lines into him. She died the night my daughters were taken, he continued. Murdered by my own court. Elara's breath caught. Why? Valerius's silver eyes hardened. Because Seraphine was human. The air went still. Elara stared at him. Human. Yes. His gaze lifted to hers. Like you. Something inside Elara shifted, like a lock turning. You loved her, Elara said, not as a question. Valerius inclined his head. I chose her. Against tradition. Against the council. Against everything my world demanded. Elara's chest tightened. And they punished her. They punished us, Valerius said quietly. They could not kill me. So they took what I loved. Elara's hands trembled. And your daughters? They were leverage, Valerius said. To force me to step down. To fracture my rule. Elara felt fury rise like fire. So you're saying my children were weapons before they were even named? Valerius met her gaze steadily. Yes. And you expect me to what? Elara snapped. Hand them over now that you've decided to come back into their lives? Valerius's jaw tightened. No. That stopped her. No, she repeated. I expect nothing, he said. I will not take them from the only mother they have known. Elara searched his face for deception. Found none. Then what do you want? She demanded. Valerius's voice softened, dangerously so. I want them safe. Elara laughed bitterly. You bring danger with you. I know, he said. Which is why I am here to offer you a choice. Ilara narrowed her eyes. I don't like choices offered by kings. Valerius almost smiled. Nor should you, he said. But listen anyway. He straightened, every inch the ruler he was rumored to be. The air seemed to bow to him, not magically but instinctively. The hunters are funded by Lady Mirelda Hartley, Valerius said. Ilara's blood ran cold. The mayor's wife? She is more than that, Valerius replied. Her family once served my court as suppliers. Traffickers. When I dismantled their influence, they fled into the human world. Ilara clenched her fists. She recognized the pendants. Yes. His eyes darkened. And she knows what they mean. Ilara felt sick. She's been watching us. For years, Valerius said. Ilara pressed a hand to her mouth. Every insult, every unpaid coin, every sharp smile, it all clicked into place. She stayed close, Ilara whispered. Close enough to wait. Valerius nodded. And now that I have returned, she will move faster. Ilara's voice shook. What kind of hunters are we talking about? Valerius's answer was quiet. Men who believe monsters deserve chains. Ilara thought of Arya's calm eyes. Lyra's laughter. The way they trusted the world despite how the world treated them. No, Ilara said fiercely. I won't let them touch my girls. Then you must leave Rose Hill, Valerius said. Ilara froze. Leave? Yes. His voice was steady, certain. Tonight. Before sunset. Ilara stared at him like he'd struck her. This is our home. It is a cage, Valerius corrected gently. One you have endured out of necessity. Ilara's eyes burned. Everything I have is here. Valerius stepped closer, but stopped a respectful distance away. Everything that matters is upstairs. Ilara hated that he was right. And where would we go? She demanded. Valerius's gaze lifted toward the mountains. To my territory. Ilara's heart thundered. To a vampire kingdom? To a place protected by my law, he said. Where no one would dare harm them. Ilara shook her head violently. I won't trade one prison for another. You would not be a prisoner, Valerius said. You would be my guest. Ilara scoffed. That's a pretty word for leverage. Valerius's eyes flashed. You are not leverage. Ilara met his gaze, unflinching. To your enemies I am. Silence stretched between them. Then Valerius did something completely unexpected. He knelt. Not dramatically. Not ceremonially. Simply, lowered himself until he was at her eye level, one knee to the wooden floor. Ilara's breath left her in a rush. I swear by blood and crown, Valerius said quietly, that no harm will come to you under my protection. Not from my court. Not from my enemies. Not from me. Ilara's voice trembled. And if your court demands my daughters? Valerius didn't hesitate. Then they will answer to me. Ilara swallowed hard. And if they demand me? Valerius's gaze softened in a way that made her chest ache. Then they will answer to us. Ilara looked away, overwhelmed. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You took in 2 children abandoned in the snow. You endured scorn and poverty without bitterness. You raised my daughters without knowing what they were, and loved them anyway. Ilara's eyes burned. Love doesn't make me strong. Valerius stood slowly. It already has. The choice did not come easily. Ilara spent the day packing in silence, hands moving automatically, heart breaking with every folded dress, every memory tucked away. Father Rowan came by and took one look at her face before nodding solemnly. You're leaving, he said. Yes. He didn't ask why. He only pressed a small wooden cross into her palm. For courage, he said. Ilara hugged him harder than she meant to. The twins were excited, too excited. Are there castles? Lyra asked, bouncing. Yes, Valerius answered calmly. Are there books? Arya asked. Entire libraries, Valerius said. Arya smiled for the first time in days. At sunset, as Ilara locked the door of Tread of Grace for the last time, a scream echoed from the far end of town. Then another. Valerius stiffened. They have arrived. Ilara's heart slammed. Already? They were waiting, he said grimly. Shadows moved at the edge of the street, men with lanterns, metal glinting beneath coats. Valerius turned to Ilara, eyes blazing silver. Stay behind me. I won't hide, Ilara said fiercely, stepping forward. Valerius's gaze flicked to her, surprised then, impressed. Very well, he said. But stay close. The hunters emerged fully now, 6 men, armed with iron-tipped weapons etched in runes that made the air burn. Lady Merelda stepped forward, smile triumphant. "There you are," she said sweetly. "I was wondering when the monster would show himself." Valerius's voice was ice. "You have no claim here." Merelda laughed. "Oh, I do. Those children belong to the night, and the night is mine to sell." Ilara felt Valerius's power rise, thick and dangerous. But before he could strike, Arya stepped forward. "Stop," she said. The world seemed to hold its breath. Merelda sneered. "Get back, little thing." Arya lifted her pendant and spoke a word that made the hunters drop to their knees screaming. "Ancient. Sure. Not human." Valerius's eyes widened. "Impossible," he whispered. Ilara stared at Arya in shock. "Arya?" Arya turned to her, calm as ever. "Mama, I think we're more than bait." The ground cracked beneath the hunters' feet. Their weapons shattered like glass. Lady Merelda screamed as shadows wrapped around her ankles. Valerius stared at his daughter with awe, and something like fear. "She has awakened," he breathed. Ilara pulled both twins to her chest as the hunters fled into the night. "What does that mean?" Ilara demanded. Valerius looked at her, really looked at her now. "It means," he said slowly, "my daughters are not just heirs." His gaze flicked to Ilara, intense and reverent. "They are queens in the making." Ilara's heart thundered, because she suddenly understood something terrifying. This was no longer just about survival. It was about destiny. And destiny was far more dangerous than hunters. The queen who chose love. The road beyond Rose Hill did not feel like escape. It felt like crossing a boundary the world had tried to hide. Valerius led them through the mountain pass as night fell, his presence bending the shadows around them like a living cloak. The air grew colder the farther they traveled, but Ilara noticed something strange. Arya and Lyra did not shiver. Snow brushed their cheeks like a greeting, not a threat. Ilara rode in the carriage between her daughters, arms wrapped around them, heart pounding with every unfamiliar sound. Each time the wind howled, she imagined hunters bursting from the dark. Each time the carriage slowed, she feared it was a trap. Valerius rode beside them on a midnight black steed, silent, watchful, his silver eyes scanning the darkness like sentinels. "Mama," Lyra whispered, peeking through the carriage curtain. "Is he going to leave us again?" The question cut deeper than any blade. Ilara swallowed. "No," she said firmly, even though she wasn't certain. "Not this time." Valerius heard her. He leaned closer to the carriage, his voice low but clear. "I will not leave them again," he said. "Not unless they ask me to." Lyra studied him seriously. "And if Mama asks?" Valerius did not answer immediately. Then he said something that made Ilara's chest ache. "Then I would obey," he said. "Even if it destroyed me." Ilara looked at him sharply. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Valerius met her gaze. "I never do." The nocturne citadel rose from the mountains like a crown carved from night. Ilara had imagined dark towers and screaming gargoyles. What she found instead was something breathtaking. The castle was vast, yes, but elegant. Silver-lit spires reached toward the stars. Waterfalls flowed with glowing frost, and gardens bloomed with pale flowers that shimmered like moonlight. The air hummed, not with menace but with power held in careful balance. Servants bowed as Valerius passed, their eyes widening when they saw Ilara and the twins. Whispers followed them like smoke. "The human. The Moonblood heirs. She dares bring her here." Ilara felt every stare like a blade. Valerius placed a hand lightly at the small of her back, not possessive but grounding. "You are safe," he murmured. Ilara lifted her chin. "Then make them understand that." He did. The moment they entered the grand hall, Valerius's voice rang out, calm, controlled, and absolute. "Kneel." Every vampire present dropped to one knee. Ilara's breath caught. Valerius turned, gesturing toward her and the twins. "This is Ilara Wynn," he said. "The woman who saved my daughters. The woman who raised them when I could not." Murmurs rippled through the hall. "She stands under my protection," Valerius continued. "Any harm done to her, or to Arya and Lyra, will be answered with exile or death. There will be no debate." Silence fell like a blade. Ilara had never been defended like that. Not publicly. Not without condition. She felt something shift inside her, fear loosening its grip, replaced by something dangerous. Confidence. But protection did not mean peace. The Nocturne Council convened 3 nights later. Ilara stood at the edge of the chamber, hands clenched in her skirts, while the twins sat beside her, calm, alert, unervingly aware. Elder vampires lined the crescent-shaped table, their eyes ancient and sharp. One of them spoke first. "The children are powerful," said Lord Selim, his voice like ice scraping stone. "Too powerful. Their awakening threatens balance." "They are children," Ilara snapped before she could stop herself. Selim's gaze slid to her. "They are weapons." Valerius's power flared. "They are my daughters." "And hers," Selim countered smoothly. "Which is precisely the problem." Ilara's stomach twisted. "She is human," another council member said. "Wait. Temporary." Valerius rose slowly from his throne. "She is neither," he said coldly. Selim leaned forward. "Then prove it." Ilara's heart pounded. "Prove what?" Selim smiled thinly. "That she belongs here." Valerius's jaw tightened. "I will not subject her to." "I will," Ilara said suddenly. Every eye turned to her. Valerius stared. "Ilara." She met his gaze, steady despite the fear screaming in her veins. "I won't hide behind you while they decide my children's fate." Arya watches her with quiet pride. Lyra squeezed her hand. "What do you want?" Ilara asked the council. Selim's smile sharpened. "A trial." The trial of blood and wool was older than the citadel itself. Ilara stood alone in a circular chamber carved from obsidian, the floor etched with glowing runes. The air pressed heavy against her skin. "This trial will test your resolve," Selim's voice echoed. "Your truth. Your willingness to sacrifice." Ilara swallowed. "I've done that my whole life." The runes ignited. Visions exploded around her. She saw Rose Hill again, herself kneeling in the snow, lifting the basket. She saw Lady Merelda's sneer. The unpaid coin on the counter. The nights she cried silently so the twins wouldn't hear. Then the visions changed. She saw Arya and Lyra grown, crowned, powerful, ruling a kingdom that did not include her. She stood outside the gates, aging, forgotten. "Let them go," the voices whispered. "They do not need you." Ilara fell to her knees. Her heart screamed. Then she saw another vision. The twins alone, terrified, cold, calling for her. "No," Ilara whispered fiercely. "I will not abandon them." The voices pressed harder. "Choose," they demanded. "Your life, or theirs." Ilara didn't hesitate. "Theirs," she said. The chamber went silent. The runes dimmed. Selim's voice sounded again, quieter now. "The trial is complete." The doors opened. Valerius was there instantly, pulling her into his arms before she could fall. "You should not have had to do that," he said hoarsely. Ilara clutched his coat. "They're my daughters." Valerius rested his forehead against hers, his control visibly strained. "So are you," he said softly. "In every way that matters." The council knelt. Selim bowed his head. "The human has passed," he said. "By law, she is family." That night, Ilara stood on a balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. She felt different. Not powerful, but seen. Valerius joined her, silent as ever. "You could have walked away," he said. "I would have taken them alone." Ilara turned to him. "And they would have lost their mother." His silver eyes softened. "You are stronger than any queen I have known," he said quietly. Ilara shook her head. "I don't want a throne." Valerius stepped closer. "Neither did my wife." Ilara met his gaze. "Then what do you want from me, Valerius?" He hesitated, just a breath. "Not obedience," he said. "Not duty." Then honestly, dangerously, partnership. Ilara's heart thundered. Outside, the twins laughed somewhere in the gardens, their voices bright and alive. Ilara looked at the kingdom spread before her. Then at the king who had knelt before her. "I won't be your queen," she said softly. Valerius nodded, accepting. "But," Ilara continued, "I will stand beside you." Something ancient and hopeful lit his eyes. "That," he said, "is far more powerful." And for the first time since the snowstorm 7 years ago, Ilara felt something she had never truly known before. Belonging. The thread that bound the night. Peace never arrived quietly. It crept in slowly, like dawn testing the horizon, unsure whether the darkness would allow it to stay. 4 weeks after the trial, Ilara lived within the nocturne citadel as something new and unsettling to its ancient halls. Not a prisoner, not a guest, not a queen. A mother. She woke early as she always had, even when servants offered to handle everything. She still braided Arya's hair herself. Still chased Lyra through corridors when she refused to wear shoes. Still mended small tears in dresses at night, needle flashing softly in moonlight. The vampires watched. Some with suspicion. some with awe, some with fear. Because the twins changed the court simply by existing. Arya spent hours in the ancient library, tracing symbols older than the kingdom itself, reading languages no human should understand. The books responded to her, pages turning on their own, runes glowing when her fingers passed over them. Lyra trained in the courtyard, laughing as she moved faster than any child should, stronger than any adult expected. She learned quickly, instinctively, her joy never dimming even when instructors stared in disbelief. And always, they returned to Alara. Not to Valerius, not to the throne, to her. That truth unsettled the court more than any prophecy. The first real test came at the Blood Moon Summit. Rival clans gathered beneath crimson skies, their banners snapping in the cold wind. Power gathered like a storm. Old enemies whispered alliances. Ancient grudges resurfaced. Valerius stood at the head of the hall, regal and unyielding. Alara stood beside him. Not behind. Not below. Beside. She does not belong there, a rival lord sneered openly. A human cannot stand in a conclave of immortals. Alara felt the weight of every gaze. Before Valerius could speak, Arya stepped forward. She belongs, Arya said calmly. The hall stilled. She is the one who chose us, Arya continued. When she had nothing to gain. Lyra grinned. And she's scarier than all of you when she's angry. A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the crowd. Alara placed a hand on each child's shoulder. I don't want your power, Alara said, voice steady despite her racing heart. I don't want your blood or your throne. I want my daughters safe. And I want a world where they don't have to become monsters to survive it. Silence. Then one elder rose slowly. Perhaps, he said thoughtfully, that is precisely why she should stand here. The summit ended without war. For the first time in centuries, treaties were signed without bloodshed. Not because Valerius threatened them, but because Alara reminded them what power was for. Lady Merelda Hartley did not live to see that peace. Her trial was swift. Her crimes, child trafficking, collusion with hunters, betrayal of both human and vampire law, were laid bare before the court. She screamed. She pleaded. She spat Alara's name like a curse. Alara did not watch her punishment. She was upstairs helping Lyra with a torn sleeve. Because justice, Alara had learned, didn't need an audience. On the anniversary of the snowstorm, the kingdom gathered again, this time not for war or trial, but remembrance. Candles lined the citadel steps. The air was soft, heavy with memory. Valerius stood before the people. 7 years ago, he said, I lost everything. His gaze shifted, to Alara. Because I was powerful, and blind. He turned to the twins. And 7 years ago, a woman with nothing but kindness and courage saved what power could not. The crowd bowed not to him. To her. Alara's breath caught. Valerius faced her then, silver eyes unguarded. I once believed crowns made kings, he said quietly. You taught me otherwise. He knelt. Not as a ruler. As a man. Alara's heart stuttered. Valerius. I will not ask you to rule, he said. I will ask you to walk with me. To guide this world when my instincts turn to darkness. To remind me why I fight. Alara looked at the twins. Arya nodded gently. Lyra grinned. Say yes. Alara laughed through tears. I won't be your queen, she said softly as she had before. Valerius smiled. I know. But, Alara continued, voice firm and clear, I will be your partner. Your equal. And their mother, always. Valerius rose and took her hands. The bond that formed was not magic. It was stronger. It was chosen. Years later, stories would spread across kingdoms, human and vampire alike. They would speak of twin moonaresses who ruled with wisdom and fire. Of a king who learned humility. And of a seamstress who rewove the fate of the night itself. But in the quiet hours, when crowns were set aside and titles forgotten, Alara sat by the hearth, mending a small tear in Lyra's cloak while Arya read aloud. Valerius watched from the doorway, silver eyes warm. Because in the end, the most powerful thing in the world was not blood. Not destiny. Not immortality. It was a woman who chose love in the snow, and became the thread that bound monsters, kings and children into a family. The end.